So this is talk about, particularly about the River Tyne Hogweed Eradication Project. And I carefully use the words hogweed eradication because unless you start off with the concept that you're going to remove every single plant, it's a complete waste of time. Every single flowering plant that's left on your river will produce 10,000 more seeds that go into the seed bank in the ground. So that's why I have this maxim, remember, no plant must flower. That's the key message to remember in any hogweed eradication program. Now, before I start, I'd like to pay tribute to our sponsors, and we had a sponsorship in our first year only from Nature Scotland, and they didn't continue that in year 2, sadly, but we've got continued sponsorship for the last 2 years, and indeed our year number 3 coming up from Bayer UK, who supplied us with a small amount of chemical. Now, this is the plant Giant Hogweed, which most of you will be quite familiar with, but it's quite a pretty plant, and you can understand why it was introduced into the great grand house gardens as a garden exotic, brought in from overseas. It looks very structural, bit of colour about it, and you can see why people, when the plants died and they dried them in the winter and they would spray them, and they looked very, very interesting. But the horror was that the seeds were passing around the countryside at the same time. And this is one of the dangers of introducing new species into our country, whether it's plants or animals. And there's this great desire to introduce new species of animals into our countryside these days. And we just need to be slightly mindful if they do run amok like the giant hogweed did in our patch. We're aware that giant hogweed also, of course, when the sap gets onto your fingers, you can see the blisters that are on the hands to the side there. They cause very nasty burns and can be quite horrible. So just to give you a little bit background about my love-hate relationship with giant hogweed, started at least 28 years ago. As a child, I was brought up on a farm near a village of Stenton on the Beal and Whittingham Water. And these plants, I think they did escape from Whittingham House, which was the former residence of Mr. Lord Balfour, Arthur Balfour, who was the former Prime Minister. And these plants were obviously introduced as garden exotics, and they snuck their way out of the garden and immediately started working their way downstream. And I happened to farm downstream from Whittingham House. And over a number of years, back in the late 80s, the landowners down that river, 5 major landowners, had started to control giant hogweed in their own way, doing their own thing from time to time. But after 2 or 3 years, they realized that they couldn't do it unless everybody did it together. So we got together, and these 5 landowners, the major landowners, but you'll see from the slide that there's now 28 other riparian owners all the way down that river, some large, some small. And they got together and we agreed to all tackle the giant hogweed together. And this was on an 8-mile stretch of river. And for some reason, I volunteered to be the coordinator on that river. And apart from a short time when I was relieved of that duty, I'm back on again and continuing as coordinator now. Now, we spent most of that time concentrating only on giant hogweed. Now, this giant hogweed in this river was what I call wall to wall. You'll not find a more dense concentration of hogweed anywhere in any river section today. We had miles of this dense hogweed to deal with, and it took a long time to get the initial phase looking as if we're making progress. And only in the last 5 years did we start to seriously tackle giant knotweed, Japanese knotweed, sorry, and Himalayan balsam. And now we're pretty much free from giant hogweed on the river. I mean, you'd think we would be after that time, apart from new intruders that keep coming in from external contamination sources. And most of the Japanese knotweed has gone, and we still have only a few plants of Himalayan balsam on that river. So that's where I started, and I came to retire to East Lothian, and I looked at the River Tyne, walking down the edge of it, and I could see there was a few hogweeds there, and I thought, this is a pity if these hogweeds get to be like our wall-to-wall hogweed. So I asked different people within the council, conservation groups, and said, what do we do, and how is there somebody doing this? Because it's a pity if it gets out of hand. And I got very encouraging message by saying, yes, the volunteers do stuff from time to time, but clearly from my background experience, unless we did the thing, everybody doing it together, it wasn't going to be successful. So in discussion with the volunteers, and it's the East Lothian Countryside Volunteers, agreed to take this project under their umbrella. And we started off, we were going to do from Haddington to the sea, which is about 7 miles. So I got on the phone and spoke to the landowners, and by the time 2 hours had passed, we'd got agreement from all the landowners downstream, the major landowners, downstream to the sea. So I thought, well, why don't we try a little bit further upstream? So we got on the phone again after a couple of days and felt suitably enthusiastic and found that every single landowner upstream, once you explained the programme, once you explained it was a complete project and everyone was doing it, but understanding that it was voluntary, that the landowners were doing all of this in their own cost at their own time, and they were still happy to do that. Now, we were lucky, we managed to get volunteers through ELCV, I'll call it, just to save a few words. And we had about 50 volunteer landowners and 20 volunteer spotters willing to put plants on a map. Now, we were even luckier to have somebody, one of the volunteers of the East Lothian Countryside Volunteers, Dave Quarrendon, who's in the audience tonight. He developed a map that is an online GPS mapping tool. And I'll show you it later, but that is one of the unique features of this river project, that not only does it track the plants where they are today, but it will also allow us historically to plot our progress year on year as we go through it. I used to have to do this on the Beal and Whitchester Water by drawing little drawings by hand and painting in coloured areas that I called wall to wall or slightly scattered or single plants. So that dynamic mapping tool is a wonderful thing that we're very lucky to have. And that's what the map looks like. On the screen, you see the characters. There's multiple flowering hogweeds or hogweeds, and they have colours on them. And that reflects where the plants have been reported by the spotters. And we can have a map that will be specific to the year or specific to Japanese knotweed or specific to giant hogweed or whatever. Project started 2019, so we're now, this will be starting year 3 of our project. Now I'm going to log into this, this is an online map, so I'm going onto the internet, so I can do this because I'm at home. I couldn't do this in a local village hall unless we had very good internet. So you go onto the website and you can see the website address at the top of the page there, and that takes you straight to the mapping page. And I'm going to show up the screen and hopefully you can all see that. And I can open up the map here and we can see that I'm going into somewhere near about East Linton, this area here. And if I just come in here and click on one of these buttons here, a screen pops up at the side that says 2 giant hogweed, south side of the river, 1 large big bud, and all removed, and that was removed on the 7th of June. So that must have been during a year-end sort of mopping up that we did to remove plants. And that one there is a Japanese knotweed, 0.1 square metre, south side of the river. So it gives it a location. And it means if a farmer wishes to look on this map, he can actually go in there and see whether that's on his side of the river or his neighbour's side of the river, because the script tells you that even if the GPS can't accurately necessarily put it to the right side of the river. One of the interesting features about last year was we had a strange, you can see how the river, it's a very extensive river, and we're heading up now almost to near Inveresk. In fact, we're at Carberry here. And this was a strange little outbreak that was reported to us by volunteers in the month of June. I'll click on that icon there, and if you the screen, you may not be able to read it, so I'll read it to you. GH, which is giant hogweed times 100 flowering, who found it 17th of June 2020, cleared by a small army of volunteers. Well, that was quite unexpected. Now, this is a wee river called, it's hardly a river, it's a Bellyford burn, and It's about 1 metre water width, and it's a very skittery little piece of water. But by Jove, was it full of hogweed. And we knew nothing about that. So we were very lucky to get that reported to us, because that would have put seeds downriver into our main river stream. And with a small army of volunteers, there was about 7 or 8 of us, went down. We contacted the landowner, and like most other landowners, he really hadn't thought much about it. But when he knew it was a combined project being done by all the farmers all the way up the river, he was instantly very happy to help. So what we did was we cut all the heads off the plants. We took some of the main stems down. We bagged up all the flowering heads, and he disposed of them for us, probably on a bonfire or something, but you've got to dispose of them safely. And we sprayed the remaining plants that were left after we'd taken the heads off. And then the farmer agreed that he would continue and look after that patch of ground and spray them later on in the year, picking up the ones that we'd missed when we went through. So that was where the volunteers were particularly helpful in removing plants at that late stage. And they'd been very valuable because they had been mapping on the way through. Now, one of the important things that for volunteers is, and indeed the farmers themselves for that matter, is to understand which one's the villain. Now, if we were all sitting in the same room, on this particular slide, I'd be asking you to point to the one that you think is the giant hogweed, which one's the villain. And you'll agree that a lot of the flowering heads do look slightly similar. So just to be smart, you can guess which one you think is the villain, and I'll tell you the answer in a minute. But the one in the bottom is actually butterbur, and it's often confused by bystanders, by the public. They think it's this big plant with the big leaves, but actually it's a very innocuous plant with a totty wee flower that you only see in springtime. So of course the villain was the top right-hand one, which I'm sure you all got correct. But common hogweed, which is the bottom left-hand one on my screen, if you're not reversed, common hogweed can be confused with giant hogweed at certain stages, and it can look very devastatingly similar. In our philosophy as well, if you can't tell the difference, take it out. To recognise the hogweed, we can easily see the bottom left-hand picture is the one we all recognise with the larger sort of jagged leaves. But the top left-hand picture is a little seed bed of giant hogweeds. So these are little giant hogweed plants, and that shows you the seed density that was obviously in this ground when we started in 2000, and I think that's a 2020 picture. And that's a little seedling off, similar to the one that's on the top right beside the beech leaves. One of the difficulties of not just spotting, but then finally treating these plants on the river is finding them and seeing them. And yes, if they're GPS, you can know where they should be. But if you imagine you're walking along that opposite banking, and this is the River Tyne, walking along the opposite banking there where the trees are, with your knapsack sprayer, it's actually impossible really to see these plants that are right down beside the river edge. So you have to be very diligent and very consistent and come down to the river edge and peek in. And the spotters will sometimes walk up the river, but this can be quite a big river and it's quite deep at times. And it's not the safest of place for individuals to go in on their own. But we sometimes do go up the river, and it's the only way we can access some of the tricky bits of plants and remove them from the edge. So this is a good example of where people can help each other by spotting plants from opposite sides of the river bank. As I said, the main project is based on giant hogweed, but we have said to all the landowners, as you're passing by, please spray the Japanese knotweed and also the Himalayan balsam. I have to say Himalayan balsam is a very pretty plant, but it can be extraordinarily invasive in a river. And as you take out the giant hogweed, it's things like Himalayan balsam that creep in behind it, rather than just a nice mixture of grasses and other wildflower plants. So it can be quite invasive. But we do have large chunks of that in the river, and I'm not trying to pretend that we're actually going to remove all of these at this initial point in the project. And I just re-emphasize that when we worked on the Beal and Whittingham water, on that 8-mile stretch of river, it took us about 20 years to really want to concentrate on the Japanese knotweed and Himalayan balsam. So I think we will get to them eventually, but I think we just need time to consolidate and get rid of these hogweed plants first. So I did explain that we had this wonderful GPS map. Now I have to mute my mic here. So I'm going to mute my mic and I'll leave the video to run. There's a little video that shows you how the landowner can find a plant on the river. So I'm going to, and this was done by Dave Quarrendon. So I'm going to just tick my mic.
You can use the Tyne Hogweed eradication map as a sat-nav to find plants. This video shows me using the map on my mobile to find a plant out in the real world. Recently, James Wylie spotted 2 giant hogweed plants on the Tyne, which are now on the map. So I went to see if I could find one of them. He said they were near the iron bridge downstream from Preston Mill. So I drove there, opened the map and zoomed in to the area. I knew the map currently had all of last year's sightings, all in blue and red, but I could find these because they were temporarily coloured purple. Ah, there's the one. So I clicked on it and saw the summary. It says one large GH north side of river. That's the one I wanted. So I clicked on the title to see the full details. So then I found the tiny arrow that gives you sat-nav directions, just like sat-nav in a car. And now the blue dot shows me exactly where I am. And it tracks me whilst I am walking towards the plant. So yeah, it was a bit difficult to see close up, so I changed from the satellite view to a plain map view. I keep going and I'm seeing that I'm getting closer and closer. And this is what I said at the time. This is a plant that James found a week ago, and he sent me a GPX file. I've put it on the map and now I'm trying to locate it. Well, it should be just here. Oh, I've gone past it. See the big circle, quite a big blue circle. Let me go back a bit and wait for it to catch up with me. And it should be just here. Wow, right on the nail. I think it may have been treated already.
Well, I think that Dave was a little disappointed it had already been treated. He sounded a little disappointed. But of course, the farmer may have got there before him, so credit to him for that. But the fact that these plants have been treated is obviously the point of the purpose, and the purpose of the project is to make sure we remove all these plants. But this map, this demonstration on the phone shows very clearly how the smartphone can be used to find plants. Now, sometimes that plant had obviously, we think, been sprayed, but sometimes farmers are guilty of spraying the plants at the slightly too late and at the wrong time. And I'm assuming you can hear me, Natalie?
Yes, you're fine, loud and clear.
That's fine. Some of the plants can be sprayed too late, and once they're into stem extension, then there is a risk that these plants, if they produce a flower head, can actually take that through to seed before the spray has been effective. So it is important to spray these plants early. Now, keeping in contact with everyone is really very important in a project like this. And what we try to do is to have a spring meeting in February. Clearly, this will be done by Zoom. But when we started, we had a meeting in Haddington in the town hall. And it's an opportunity for everyone to see each other and understand that it is being supported by everybody. And we would like to try and organise a summer walk. That's difficult and wasn't possible last year. Or maybe a Zoom meeting in the summer. And then on the Tyne, we've produced an annual report. So as the season goes through, the spotters will come back up through and survey the river for hopefully the last time, and we would tend to try and do this about July. And at that point, we would remove any last flowering plants that we found, or ask the farmers themselves to do that. And we would designate a green tick onto the map to designate that that section of the map has been cleared of all flowering hogweeds. So let me be clear, it doesn't mean to say there are no single little seedling plants in amongst the grass. It means there are no flowering plants that we're aware of. And that means that no new seed is going back down into the seed bank in the soil to produce plants over the next 20 years or so. So the green ticks is a wonderful success story, and we've been able to put green ticks over the whole of the River Tyne in the last 2 years. So that's been really successful. So 2021, what do you think we would do differently? We just need to make sure that all the landowners are equally thorough, that they're all doing their bit, and not require me to chase them up all the time. They can learn to help each other, because as we saw with the plants down the side of the bank of the river, down beside the edge of the river, you can't see them. Sometimes it's easier for a neighbour to spray your neighbour's plants, provided he agrees you to do that. If it's just over the fence, sometimes that's a lot quicker than phoning him up and telling him he's got plants there to deal with. So help each other is the answer. Make sure you do spray the plants early enough. So you're talking about spraying in to suit your own farming operation, March, April, but certainly before stem extension occurs, late May. To remove a flowering plant can literally take about 15 to 20 minutes. To remove the head, bag it up, and all the volunteers that were involved with the one up at the Bellyford burn will understand how long that job was. And then you've got to carry off these plants, and then you've got to dig out the roots, because you're never sure whether that plant, being a biennial, thinks it's still got another year to go and will continue to produce more shoots and try and make a flower. But to spray the plant themselves pre-flowering takes about 2 seconds. So it is important to spray them in time and not come around late and think I'll do it later and get away with it. It doesn't work. Some of the landowners could make the river edge a little bit easier to access just by running a forklift up with a bucket in front of it, just to make a little track up, that then they could get access to the river edge more easily to see if they've got hogweeds, and we could obviously get access without walking up the river. And one of the things we need to do continually is to say thanks to all our volunteers, and to remember that from a community point of view, this is a voluntary project. All the landowners are doing this in their own time at their own cost. All the volunteers, the spotters, are doing this at their own time and in their own cost as well. So we were very grateful to be given an award last year from Scottish Land and Estates And we were the winners of the, I'm just reading carefully the words, Enhancing Our Environment Award was our award. And you can see the lovely, splendid award that we were given last year. And I was delighted, and I'm sorry that we had to receive it in a COVID distancing situation, but I was delighted to receive this award on behalf of all of the East Lothian Countryside Volunteers and the volunteering farmers and landowners and householders who've been working hard over that 2-year period to remove all of these giant hogweed plants. So it was rather splendid that the community out there in the broader sense appreciated the amount of work that we had done. So what next as I reach the end of this presentation? What next for 2021? Well, I did explain that some of our tributary went way up close beside Inveresk village, up beside Carberry, up Bellyford Burn. And our risk up in these areas is about reinfection when we start to clear our river, as happened on the Beal and Whittingham water. We get lorries carting seeds down the A1 from Musselburgh down to, and from near Edinburgh bypass down to our patch. So the Inveresk Village Society, I guess, had heard about the award we were given. The story went in the press, and I think it engendered a degree of extra interest that if we could do it in the Tyne, we could maybe do it in the Esk. So they very kindly got together and decided that they would start a project, and it's going to cover 4 miles. Now the Esk is about 70 miles, I think, in total, but the 4, and all the tributaries, the 2 Esks, but 4 miles from the A68 down to the sea. So that project is going to start this year. Some of the Inveresk Village Society people will be with us tonight, and they might wish to say something about it. It'll involve about 10 main riparian owners, but there'll be dozens of householders, no doubt, all the way down. The coordinator is Catherine Shanks, who I think is with us tonight, and she happens to be my daughter, so hello, Catherine. And Dave Quarrendon, who I mentioned earlier, who's done the mapping for the Tyne River map, has kindly agreed to do the same GPS mapping facility for the Inveresk Village Society and host a map on the East Lothian Countryside Volunteers website on their behalf. So that's going to be an exciting project coming up, covering a new river and the start of major work there. And I would just finally like to pay tribute again to East Lothian Countryside Volunteers, whose umbrella that this whole project of the River Tyne is operated under, and of course to Bayer UK, who are supporting us again in 2021 with supply of a small amount of chemical. So thank you very much.